Hello, my name is Morgan Potter, and I am currently working in a pre-K classroom that consists of children from 3 to 5 years of age. Today I will be discussing my culturally responsive library project that compares books I selected from a public library in our area and the demographics within the classroom I am working in. First, let's begin with race. On the left-hand side, you will see the demographics of any character in any of the books, and there is a high concentration of white characters that have been embedded into the books, whereas on the right-hand side, you'll notice that the main characters who are non-human increases compared to just having non-human characters within a book. I hypothesize this is the author's attempt to avoid any subconscious biases when a child is consuming a book and really ensure that the life lessons they are attempting to portray are able to be digested. But I did find it interesting and surprising that most main characters in the children's books I was observing were non-human. Next, we will look at examples of different books that had different races as the lead characters. On the left, you will see He Is There by Audra Haney, which incorporates Asian lead characters. A book that incorporated white lead characters was The Littlest Weaver. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you see Soulful Strutton, which incorporated African American lead characters. Lastly, on the bottom, there is a book titled Tale of the Shadow King, which actually incorporates a Latinx lead character along with a white lead character. We will now be taking a look at gender as it related to the books I was analyzing. So on the left-hand side, you'll see just characters in general that were in the books, and the highest percentage was female at 42.1% of books, and next was male with 36.8% of male characters within the books. On the right-hand side, though, we see that female characters, while there was 42% of books containing female characters, only 39% of books had females as the main characters. So oftentimes those female characters are representing more of a supporting role or a bystander within the book. Additionally, on this screen, we will be comparing the library directly to the demographic within my classroom. So on the left-hand side, you will see representation of 76% of books incorporating a family structure that contained mother, father, and 2 children, whereas 24% of books were representing other family structures. On the right-hand side is the demographics of my classroom represented in a pie graph, which shares that 50% of the children in my classroom are coming from a household that contains a mother, father, and 2 children, whereas 50% are coming from other, which may be a grandparent raising them, a homosexual parent relationship, or maybe they're an only child. Examples of books that I analyzed that contain family structures that were not traditional or did not contain a mother, father, and 2 children was Somewhere by Robbie Harris, and which incorporated a father and a daughter with no other parent in the story. And this was also consistent in Billy and Bean in the City, which shared the story of a girl exploring the city. When she came home, it was just her mother at home, which is representing maybe a single parent relationship. Next, we will look at the setting of books in the library by us compared to the demographic of the children in my classroom. On the left-hand side, you will see a pie graph representing the settings within the books that I was analyzing, and 72% of them were other setting, which is not rural or desert setting, and only 2% were desert setting, even though on the right-hand side, you'll see that 100% of my students are coming from a desert setting. And I wanted to bring up the rural areas as 26% because that will be discussed later as maybe a window that was presented within the book. So just wrapping it up with desert areas, that while everyone in my classroom comes from desert areas, 2% of books in the library represented desert settings. Next, we will take a look at disability representation within the books I was analyzing. On the left-hand side, you will see that 90% of books were incorporating only typically developing children or children without disability, characters without disabilities, and 10% of the characters in the books had disabilities. On the right-hand side, you will see the representation of the demographic within my classroom, which shares that 75% of the students in my classroom have disabilities. While I know this might not be common in all classrooms, my preschool program is really focused on supporting children who have been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and providing resources to them. So we have a lot higher concentration in our classroom. With that said, though, I do think that 10% of books in a shelf on in a public library is quite low compared to the variety of disabilities and diagnoses that are occurring within classrooms. With all of that information in mind, I will be sharing windows that were observed within the classroom. For everyone who is familiar with this concept of windows versus mirrors in books, windows will be sharing information that would allow the children in my class, if they were to consume the books I analyzed, to see perspectives that are different than theirs. This is showing that the representation within the book may be different than what is in my classroom. That can be for good purpose, to understand others' perspectives, or for a not so great purpose, and really refraining from feeling connected with books. So first we have setting. Most of the settings within the literature were countryside or like really open land, and we live in Phoenix, Arizona, which is much more suburban lifestyle. With that said, however, there was a lack of urban perspective, and this would be the next closest thing that my children may be observing around them, would be individuals living in urban settings. So whether it's a desert setting, suburban, or urban, I think those would all be perspectives that could be valuable to learning of children they may interact with in the future. Whereas a lot of the books were focused on countryside or more imaginative settings. Next, we have race. The representation of individuals who identify as Asian or Asian American was a pleasant surprise, but was more of a window because I do not have any Asian children within my classroom or Asian American identifying children. And so this allows them to see perspectives of people who come from Asian descent and what their experiences may be. Lastly, as previously discussed, the representation of disabilities within the books I analyzed was much, much lower than what we are experiencing in our classroom, and this can be a barrier in typically developing children or children without disabilities to be able to understand the experiences their peers are going through. Next, we will discuss mirrors within the books I analyzed and how they reflect the experiences of the children in my classroom, whether that is for positive or negative purposes. First, we will discuss family structures. So I was pleasantly surprised to see that the family structures, as discussed in previous slides, was a representation of the classroom I'm working in. It was not just a heterosexual mother and father relationship with two children. There was a great variety of family structures within the books. Next, economic status. This was a not so great mirror that I identified, which was a lack of poverty within the books and not really sharing the experiences people may have if they have little means to survive or little resources. Most of the children I am interacting with come from pretty privileged lives. There's not a sense of lacking in their house of items or food or anything like that. And so they are unable to experience this. And then the books they are consuming, if they go to a public library, are also not sharing those experiences that may differ from theirs. Lastly, the race component of the books on the shelves represented that white individuals were used substantially more as lead characters, and African American characters were used as supporting characters more often. So this was a mirror of my classroom because we have Latinx and white demographics within my classroom. We have 0 African American individuals, and the concentration of African Americans in our community is not very high. And so this was a reflection that maybe they see African Americans at a restaurant occasionally or a grocery store, but they are not understanding the perspectives that they may have going through this world. And so a benefit to introducing that into libraries could be that the children would be able to understand a little more that they aren't that different than them, or they may experience some prejudices that white people do not experience. And so this was definitely a negative mirror that occurred. So my total analysis on the library shelf compared to the demographics in my classroom is that there's a balance of mirrors and windows for the children in my class, but they could definitely benefit from exploring a different shelf to ensure that there is relatability in the windows that they view. Some recommendations I have to further enrich the library shelf that I analyzed would be a book called Too Much, which explores the experiences of an autistic lead character in a way that could be relatable for everyone. It's just really focusing on like sensory overload, which I think every individual can experience from time to time. And so although this is a very common experience for individuals with autism, it's bringing a perspective that a lot of people can relate to. Additionally, Last Stop on Market Street is an award-winning book that has lead characters who are experiencing poverty and can bring that perspective to the children I am working with as well. Lastly, we have Big Moon Tortilla, which shares the experience of Native Americans in the desert, specifically in Arizona, which can bring relatability to the children I am working with by providing a setting they are familiar with. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation, and I cannot wait to hear about the results that you all have to share with me.